They said it was impossible. A creature no one should ever exist. The government did everything they could to bury the horrifying truth. A mutant, a bloodthirsty predator, had killed 101 people. Deep in the mountains of northern Arizona, scientists uncovered a creature that feeds only on human blood. No animals, just humans. This is a monster, a nightmare lurking in the shadows. Welcome to Mystery Animals Files. Tonight, we uncover the terrifying story, the mutant, blood-drinking bat that scientists tried to eliminate. The first reports were shrugged away. Ranchers found a couple of missing hikers' backpacks, a torn tent flap snagged on a mesquite tree. Outside the boundary of a small logging access road, a jogger discovered something stranger. The carcass of a man. Small punctures at the base of his neck, and almost no blood left in the body. No tracks. No signs of setted. No signs of struggle. The coroner, privately, said the wounds resembled bites, but like none he'd seen before. Dr. Alan Keller arrived only because he could not sleep when he heard about it. Keller was not a sensational man. He was methodical, a wildlife biologist with a specialty in chiropteran behavior, years of night counts and bat banding under his belt. Arizona had big bats, free-tailed bats with impressive wingspans, so the state called Keller early that week to take a look. He expected a misidentified raptor or a feral dog. He did not expect a predator that treated humans the way scout birds treat grubs. At the first scene, Keller and a small team retrieved samples. Microscopic fur fragments caught on bark, pattern impressions in the dirt from a sweeping wing beat, and a smear of DNA on a torn rainfly. The lab returned results 28 hours later. The mitochondrial sequences matched Chiroptera only in the most general sense, with large gaps where known species had clear signatures. It was a chimera of sorts, bat-like, but with genetic anomalies that suggested either an unknown species or something new engineered by nature. That should have been the headline. Unknown predator found, scientists baffled. Instead, it became a whisper. Keller sent footage of infrared camera footage to colleagues. Dark shapes flitted, too large to be common bats, their wings broad and strangely tapered, their eyes reflecting like coals. One clip, barely 30 seconds, showed a shadow lunging at a figure moving a lantern, the lantern blowing out in one instant, and a single, sharp human sound cut short. Local news was hushed after a shaky phone interview with a park ranger who told his dispatcher he'd heard screams and then found a car with the interior soaked with blood. The official line, animal attack, investigation ongoing. It felt like officials were searching for reassurance more than answers. Keller's private notes tell another story. He wrote that night, in a voice only he would read. This animal, if it is an animal, is targeting people. Not livestock, not random pets. People. He reviewed autopsy photos with a steady hands but shaking voice. The puncture wounds were not round, they were slit-like, a pair of razor incisions on many victims. Blood had been drawn out with horrifying efficiency. There was minimal bite tissue. The wound seemed to be the last step in a process that removed blood with an instrument nature had somehow embedded within the predator's mouthparts. The researchers assembled their gear and set traps that should have worked. They baited enclosures with livestock carcasses, rigged thermal cameras and drones, set up perimeter tripwires that would triangulate movement, and stationed men with tranq rifles and high-powered spotlights. The first night everything went perfectly, until it didn't. At midnight the sensors lit up. Drones caught a form passing too fast for their shutter rates. Infrared picked up a warm mass slicing across the sky. And then, with the studied cruelty of a practiced hunter, it dove.
not toward the baited animals, but toward the men who stood watching. One of Keller's assistants felt a whisper at his ear, like the brushing of silk. He smelled iron. He looked down and saw a smear of blood on his glove and a tiny surgical puncture at the base of his neck. He thought he'd been mistaken for something else. He bled out in the ambulance. That was the first time Keller understood fully the bat's pattern. It had chosen a human. It was testing tactics. It wanted to know how humans behaved when threatened. It wanted to know if humans would flinch and run. Humans would scream. Humans would run. Humans bled.
The team was careful after that. They moved in smaller groups. They rotated watches. They kept logs. Keller felt eyes on him in the field, a sense that the animal studied them as much as they studied it. The bat, or the creature, showed problem-solving. It disabled infrared rigs by pelting them with guano or by slashing cable housings with obvious precision. It smashed cameras against rocks, sometimes leaving only deliberate scratches, as if marking its territory with intelligence rather than instinct. Neighbors began to disappear in numbers that could not be ignored. A hunter's pickup was found abandoned, the battery drained, the passenger door swung wide. There were prints in the mud that suggested large claws, but far overhead. A child's bicycle lay on its side near a trail, with the chain cut clean. The town's sheriff pushed back on panic, but the math was damning. Within 2 months, the community tally rose into double digits. People missing or found dead, each with 2 precise wounds and near total blood loss. Word reached higher offices. Keller's boss called in a curt, clipped voice to say federal teams might be en route. For Keller, the feeling of being watched shifted from animal to political. Men in dark suits began to come and go from town. They kept their distance but made clear demands. All data to the state, all samples to be shipped under their custody, and a single directive: do not publicize. Keller's instincts screened red. He began to keep a parallel ledger, a set of encrypted files hidden from official transfer lists. He recorded interviews with grieving families and took extra footage at night when men with authority were not watching. He had to know how many the creature targeted in a single rotation, and why it seemed to favor humans over animals. The turning point came in a way that made everyone sick with an understanding that this thing had set itself to break the taboo between species. A whole research squad, 3 scientists and 2 field techs from nearby university, arrived to assist Keller after reading a leaked summary from a sympathetic state biologist. They set up a high-tech bait, an enclosure with thermal drums, enclosed lights, and a comfortable sleeping dummy equipped with a heated pad and pheromone simulant. It was designed to be convincing. It was designed to be safe. And it failed spectacularly. At 2:17, the enclosure's alarm chirped. The researchers rushed in to find the dummy slashed open and the lights smashed. A recording captured something beyond their instruments, a shriek not like the rest, a vocalization that was wet and human-like and wrong. 2 of the researchers were found in the clearing, one's throat slit, the other's face frozen in a terrible expression. The third was missing. The techs were gone. The bait dummy was drained. Keller, who had arrived before the field was completely shut down, found marks on the trees. Hundreds, precise, arranged in a ring as if someone had arranged the kills.
The university sent the body bags to a coroner, whose notes would later be quietly amended and then sealed. In the safe rooms of government facilities, men argued into the early hours in secure channels over words like containment and eradication. In the field, however, the townspeople had no security clearance. They only had fear. Keller knew it. The creature was not a simple predator. It had the hallmarks of an adaptive mind. It had been hunting humans for weeks and would not stop until something made it stop. Men in suits wanted a clean closure. Keller wanted the creature studied and understood. The creature wanted blood that was human and the freedom to come out of the night. Each side believed the right thing. Keller closed his journal that morning with a single sentence scrawled under the photographs. It is not a bat in any way we understand. It is a hunter. It is learning. Then he looked at the list of missing and found names and added another line. If they come to kill it, they must not underestimate it. And with that, the desert went quiet again. But this time, the quiet was the sound of preparation.
The orders came down with an authority that tasted like iron. Federal teams arrived, emblazoned patches and black trucks, and temporary quarantine markers appeared like black teeth around the perimeter of a town that had only hours earlier been a dot forgotten on a state map. The message from Washington was terse: contain, neutralize, and, if necessary, eliminate. Keller watched them move in and felt a coldness settle over his chest. The men in suits did not come to study. They came to finish what something had started. The first weeks of the federal operation were a blur of stringing barbed wire, placing motion sensors, and marching squads into the dark. Military engineers installed perimeter lighting, and the air was thick with the hum of helicopters. But the animal had been here longer than any of them had been writing grant proposals. It knew the wind, the thermals, the river of night air that ran across ridges. It knew the way men smelled on a moonless night. Keller watched as scientific process collided with a command structure that measured success by containment rather than understanding. The federal teams used bigger traps, explosives, and night vision battalions meant to flush something into the open. They brought in noise cannons to flush birds and heat-seeking projectiles to track movement. They used thermal lures that mimicked human life. Each tactic failed with increasing and terrifying consequence. The bat adapted. When engineers set nets across a canyon gorge at 700 feet and tethered them to trip sensors, the creature simply shifted its glide path. When drones zipped out with net canisters, dozens of smaller bats swarmed the drones in patterns that confused artificial intelligence. And in that confusion, the mutant slipped like smoke and pounced. Cameras turned to shreds. Men were wounded. Its attacks became ritualistic. Entire camps were found ruined in the morning, tarps torn into ribbons, food scattered, sleeping bags slashed open, bodies arranged face up in circles as if placed there. The creature would leave behind a signature, tiny black pellets, oddly crystalline, that when analyzed yielded a protein enzyme not found in humans, vehicle grease, or known insect detritus. A pattern emerged in the carnage. Groups of 3.
humans found in clusters of 3, bodies drained in a way that left them as pale hollows. The death count climbed in ominous increments. Families were taken in the night from homes with doors latched. A teenager removed window screens to let in cool air and vanished. A veteran who slept with a rifle at his bedside was found with the gun untouched and a single set of punctures in his throat. The sheriff's deputy who led a midnight trail found the deputy's own son dead at the side of the highway. Wheel marks in the mud that suggested the vehicle had been there with the motor off. Keller's clandestine ledger, his encrypted list of names and times, filled like a warped clock. He recorded names that would never see justice, and the town counted like a litany. By the end of the first federal month, the official tally, carefully released to the public, was 37. Keller knew the privately known number was higher. He was right. The scientists, the ones who believed in evidence and pattern, tried to reason with the commanders. "Don't use explosives in the canyons," one pleaded to a colonel who had teeth like a file. "It will scatter them. It's intelligent. It will adapt." The colonel had returned the look with a shake of the head, as if he had been waiting his entire life to be handed a moral problem that required only one solution: overwhelming force. The first major offensive was on a moonless night at the rim. Helicopters hovered, spotlights strobed. Soldiers in full night gear fanned out. Explosives were set at cave mouths. Keller stood with his hands in his pockets and watched as the plan unfolded. They detonated charges meant to collapse a known roost. For 35 seconds, the earth sang a deafening lullaby. And then the lights revealed only a few stunned bats and a charred opening. The men on the ground cheered as if victory had been declared. They were wrong. Over the next 8 hours, bodies dropped across the perimeter, like a sick reversal. The bat had flown out the back way, it seemed, or been alarmed and sent out into the night in murderous anger. That night, 6 people were killed. One of them was Dr. Carmen Alvarez, a soft-spoken epidemiologist whose notes had helped Keller understand the protein in the pellets. Her last message, retrieved from her encrypted tablet, read, "They're not animals in the way we believe. They're selecting for human behavior. They are learning, and they are responding." The word eradicate echoed in meetings and then left a metallic taste in every mouth. They tried poison, a targeted aerosol to incapacitate the bat's olfactory senses. They tried sonic bombardment. They tried to chase it into traps with dogs, but their dogs returned with broken legs. They tried to starve it out with baits that weren't human. Nothing worked. And when they showed video of the creature to a panel of biologists in a secure auditorium, some of the older men, who had once believed in simple categories, left the room and did not return for days. The populace outside the perimeter was not patient. Rumors spread across state lines that the virus was airborne, that the government had staged something catastrophic and lied. People with trucks lined the roads outside, armed and afraid. Others simply fled in the night, leaving their lives behind. The quarantine tightened. Armed patrols turned away journalists. The black perimeter fence became a rumor of what had once been a town, a place with a name, with lives, with histories. Within the cordon there was only a counting of bodies. The creature's kill count ticked up with cold precision. By the time the 8th week had passed, the bodies tallied 67 known deaths. Families demanded answers.
The state released statements about a wildlife hazard and urged calm. But every calm statement revealed the opposite: panic. Then came the week of the scientific purge. It began when a senior government team, men with clearance to do what needed to be done, entered the field and set up a kill zone. They arranged personnel around a canyon that federal maps listed as a likely nesting gorge. They used bait collars, radios, triggers, and a new kind of shell that would detonate at altitude, designed to take down large flyers. Keller watched as the men in black took positions like surgeons preparing for a difficult operation. He watched because he was there by virtue of knowledge, not by permission. At 1:12, the kill zone was engaged. The shells tore through the sky, and then for an instant, the desert turned into a theater of wrecked air. The creature reacted faster than any test had predicted. Wing beats, massive, created gusts that toppled men. One by one, in a moment of impossible horror, the night filled with men clipped from the sky by the very predator they'd tried to trap. They called it chaos afterwards. The official reports would later call it a containment failure that resulted in casualties. Keller's ledger provided names: 2 federal agents, 3 field commanders, 8 military engineers, and, most devastating to the scientific community, an entire research contingent of 7 who had come to help catalog the immune peculiarities and possible zoonotic vectors. The bat had not just survived a systematically planned assault. It had turned the assault into a feed. At that point, the narrative changed tone. Up to then, officials had argued for study. Afterward, they argued for sealing. The president's office sent orders. The site was to be cordoned off, the area declared a public safety hazard, all roads blocked, and no one allowed within without explicit authorization. The language in the memo was chilling in its simplicity. The public welfare requires decisive action. It was a sterilizing phrase. It meant bodies would be removed, records would be scrubbed, and the perimeter would be sealed. 40 days into the siege, the count had reached 93. Public release was controlled, and documentaries waited by the mailbox of permission. Keller could do nothing but document in secret. He would not be allowed to go where the black trucks carried men in hazmat suits, but he watched from a ridge as the cordon lengthened and the lights multiplied. Penetration points were sealed, townspeople evacuated, and the military placed markers warning of a biological hazard. Families were moved out, told the area would be purged and made safe. But purged by whom? The bat had expanded its hunting grounds. It adapted to human movement patterns, the electrical grid, the hum of generators, the patterns of patrols, and used them against the human sense of control. It had learned that humans cluster in houses and sleep, that school schedules shape the town's rhythm. It used that knowledge like a knife. The final week was the cruelest. The creature went to the hospitals and hunting lodges and homes in a wrath that felt like retribution. It killed a nurse leaving a supply truck, a family who had refused to leave their farmhouse, an entire crew of cleanup contractors who had been misinformed of the danger level. Each body added to the tally with a black, indifferent arithmetic. By the 20th day of that month, the total, confirmed in both secret logs and in closed government reports, reached 101. 101 men, women, and children marked down as killed in the night, punctured and drained and left to the desert's slow reclaim.
This was the number that sealed the decision beyond conversation. The president authorized a permanent exclusion zone. Helicopters lifted in formation and dropped markers and heavy concrete pylons. The roads were closed. The town ceased to appear on some maps. Travel advisories were issued. Animations on government websites used sterile frames and flashing icons to warn citizens away. But the creature, which had outsmarted netting and explosives and human cunning, remained as much a part of the night as the moon. In the weeks after, news footage showed the cordon. Armed men walking perimeter lines, signs warning of a hazard, and a somber narrator telling half-truths about wildlife containment. Families grieved in secrecy. The carcasses that had been left were burned or buried in mass pits. Keller, who had tried to reason and warn and document, was given a final choice: sign a non-disclosure and accept relocation, or refuse and be removed from the field for breaking security protocols. He signed, because he could not, in good conscience, put his family at risk by staying. But he kept one thing: a tiny drive of encrypted footage and a list of names. He hid it in a bank deposit box across the state. It was his to hold until someone else had the courage to see what he had seen. A predator that had learned to prefer human blood, that had hunted with calculation, that had adapted within a month to human reprisals. It had killed scientists. It had killed men in black helmets. It had killed ordinary neighbors. 101. The final image Keller carried home to his small, quiet house was the memory of a clearing with 3 bodies placed in a ring. The bat had left them like an offering, or a message. The message, when Keller finally permitted himself to translate it in private, read like a promise. We are not alone anymore here. Months later, the sealed area remained sealed. People who had been evacuated would speak in whispers, mentioning names that were not listed on any public database. Conspiracy forums proliferated, and some talk radio hosts called it an engineered weapon gone rogue. Others insisted it was a supernatural vengeance. Keller refused those words. He refused both conspiracy and myth. He returned to the ledger sometimes in the dark and stared at the names until the paper blurred. He repeated to himself the proto-scientific phrasing he had used in private notes: adaptive predator with anthropophagy preference. He could say it aloud and feel it become smaller. But when he closed the curtains at night and listened, he sometimes swore he could hear a faint wing beat from miles away. A soft scraping that might have been anything, or might have been the very sound that had taken 101 lives. The government had sealed the land, but a creature that hunted the dark could not be washed easily from the map of human imagination. The perimeter might hold for now. The official story had been written and sanitized. But the thing that taught itself to kill people, to prefer their blood, had been neither destroyed nor explained. And in the records Keller hid away in his deposit box, in encrypted files that would be useless to most and precious to a few, there was a final, hand-scribbled note with no scientific pretension. It learned to hunt us as if we were always meant to be prey. If it ever comes back, we will not be ready. When you hear the wind skitter across the canyons of northern Arizona, or when you see the hush that falls on an empty trail at dusk, remember the list of names and the number that will not leave Keller's mind. 101. A number that the state tried to bury, and the night keeps alive. This is Mystery Animals Files, and for now, the map shows a blank.